So, from my perspective, having watched this unfold in real time, I'd have to say not right sizing your compute resources or fully understanding how many instances of a service, like the digital assistant that we mentioned earlier, that you might need to service a project. So, not taking the time to fully understand the cost of API usage, or for that matter, turning up a dedicated Gen AI cluster when you could perhaps use on demand services instead.
Wondering how much AI integration with JD Edwards will actually cost your business? Are hidden costs keeping you from fully leveraging AI solutions? Today, Charles Anderson, lead JDE cloud engineer from ERP Suites, join us to break down true costs of deploying AI solutions on Oracle Cloud infrastructure. We'll deep dive into common pricing pitfalls, real world budgeting strategies, and how to avoid unexpected expenses. Listen closely. By the end, you'll clearly understand how to budget accurately for your AI initiatives. Welcome to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, the podcast designed to clarify business technology costs and strategies. I'm Nate Bushfield, and today we're tackling the crucial question every business has. How much does AI integration on Oracle Cloud infrastructure really cost? Joining us to unpack this topic is Charles Anderson, lead JDE cloud engineer at ERP Suites. Charles, it's great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Nate. I'm doing wonderful. It's a beautiful morning, and I don't see a cloud in the sky. So,
Yeah, I know. We're very blessed over here in Chicago as well. We've actually had some great weather. I just moved here from Cincinnati, actually, and in Cincy, I haven't seen the sun in like 2 months before moving here. So I at least get to see the sun a little bit. So it's definitely doing wonders. I actually got out to golf yesterday, which was very fun, very fantastic. But enough about me. Can you give us a quick overview of your role and expertise?
yes. So, I am the lead cloud engineer, as you mentioned, with ERP Suites. I've been with the company for a little more than a year, although I've been working with JD Edwards for more than 20 years. And I reside in Austin, Texas. I've lived here for over 20 years as well, and have been working with AI for the past couple of years, but also public cloud, Oracle Cloud infrastructure since late 2017.
Yeah, I'm actually scared to ask this question, but is it over 25 years? Because at that point, I think you've been working with JD Edwards longer than I've been alive.
It is not.
Oh,
So,
thank God. All right, all right. That happens a lot on this podcast where somebody comes in and is like, "Yeah, I've been working here for or working with JD Edwards for 30 years," and I'm like, "Oh gosh,
no,
that is
that's the extent of my entire career is 30 years. But
all right." Well, I've
I
got
got
to
into
date
the JD
myself.
Edwards game a little late, right?
Yeah, back then when it was on floppy disks or something, that stuff is still insane to me. Um,
I did see the podcast that you did with Frank, and you mentioned the floppy disks and the 8-inch floppies, right?
which is hilarious because I don't think, like, I know what it is. I never really used them throughout my life, which
Hmm.
is just insane to a lot of people, but whatever. All right, let's shift into our first segment, common AI integration costs. So first question for you. What are the typical costs businesses face when integrating AI into JD Edwards on OCI?
Sure, there's direct and indirect costs, right? So AI service costs and OCI might be for a service like document understanding for something like receipt processing. It might be vision AI for image recognition, language and speech services for chat or voice interfaces. Um, and those are the service costs. You could also build your own AI solution with a GPU packed compute instance. But as far as the services go that I mentioned, all of those are pay per use APIs. So document understanding or DU, it might cost $1 to $3 per 1,000 pages processed, uh, while language service could cost per character or audio minute. And then uh, off the cuff here, a on-demand LLM might also cost per token, for instance. So you could look at an on demand, or you could look at a dedicated model if you reach a threshold where your API usage exceeds, your budget, for instance.
Really? Never really thought of it that deeply, honestly. Um, but honestly, like when it comes to the document understanding side of things, if it's one every 1,000 pages, would like in terms of a document that would be uploaded, are you seeing more of there are a lot of people that are using 1,000 pages every day, or is it a little bit of spread, like some use five, some use 1,000? What's a typical look there?
So, it really just depends on what your use case is and or in deploying AI. So we talked to a customer who was looking at a solution that would do 1,000 pages per day, because they would have an order document that would be a single page, and they would have about 1,000 orders per day. So it really, like I said, it really just depends on the use case. Um,
Yeah, awesome. But all right, we can shift to the next. Can you provide like a general price, like a price range or cost breakdown businesses should expect for different AI solutions, such as the digital assistants out there, or even what we were talking about, the document understanding?
Certainly. So digital assistant would be the easier one to tackle there, where you're paying for either a development or a production shape, and the cost of a single digital assistant instance is typically a little bit less than 5,000 a month, right around $4,700 a month if you're to run it 24 hours a day. But you don't have to run it 24 hours a day. That's just the default. Some cloud services like Autonomous Database would have an option to schedule your uptime and your downtime in the web console itself, but other services like the Digital Assistant don't. So you would have to schedule an automation for that, and you can build an automation using native cloud functions, or you could create an automation yourself using something like a Linux instance that's also running in the cloud, and use shell scripts to do that. So document understanding might run you between $1 to $1.50 per 1,000 pages processed. But you do get, I think it's the first 5,000 free. Like I said, fortunately, you can build an automation um, in OCI. So they have functions that are similar to Lambda and AWS, for instance. And I mentioned, using a shell script on a small compute instance, which it's whatever you're comfortable with doing. You could even use a Windows instance that's running on a VM in your own private data center. You don't have to use a cloud compute instance to do that, right? It's anything that has access to the API out, on the internet. As I mentioned, OCI is a free tier with a limited number of CPU and memory for those free tier services. So that'd be like the first thing that I recommend when you're setting up your tenancy. Once you have your security and perhaps OCI landing zones and basic budget worked out, an idea of what your compartments are going to look like. Maybe you're going to base your compartments on your individual departments within a company, or for individual services. But once you have all that figured out, I would create a small ARM compute instance just for that purpose, just so you can automate the startup or the control of when you have services running. Because without it, you're more than likely going to be running some of those services 24 hours, which can get expensive in the public cloud model.
Yeah, so obviously, with different use cases out there, every business is probably going to be different on how long they want their digital assistants to run. But in terms of what you would think would be, I don't know, like the most common way that someone would use it, would they be using it just like a 9 to 5 type situation, or depending on the actual company, it could go a little bit longer? Like, would we actually see anyone running it for 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean there are definitely 24-hour
Mm.
shops. So, if someone were to build a chat bot or a digital assistant that helped employees on a shop floor that's 24 hours a day, then certainly they might have that service running for that long. But other business, might be 8 to 5. But you might also want to have a service that runs when the customer of that company is perhaps sending them data. So if it's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's whatever makes sense for your business.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all customizable, which is honestly very great. I didn't really know that about our digital assistant, how we can change the amount of time that it's really up and running. So it's very great in terms of variable costs. Like you could just choose certain hours in the day that really make sense for your business.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. And like I said, it's not out of the box. All they have is a button to stop it. So that's if you're using the web console. And as I said, using an API call, you can, send a command to stop it. And then if you can do that, then you can script that activity.
yeah,
You could
yeah,
also
exactly.
get a little more detailed and say, I want to monitor logs and determine, has there been any activity for this period of time? And then, acquiesce the system, essentially shut it down at that point. But I don't want to go that far for this discussion.
Fair enough. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that it'll probably just be, oh, you use it for X amount of hours and then you turn it off at
Mhm.
the end of the day and start it the next day. I mean, I'm sure there will be some use cases out there that'll be, oh, they need it
Yeah.
for the first like X amount of hours, and then maybe they need it towards the middle of the night or something, depending on the,
Right.
like, I'm sure they'll look at their trends in terms of when the data is actually being sent, kind of like what you said. So I like how
Definitely.
it's,
And there's ways you can park data, right? Like, so
yeah,
that you receive data from a customer or a vendor and you need to process that, but you don't necessarily need it processed in real time. You can park that data out in object storage or on a file share somewhere. And then when you start that service up, it'll start consuming that data. You just need to figure out, okay, how long is it going to take to process all of last night's transactions, for instance? So, it's going backwards a little bit in terms of, how the you know certain models used to work with. I think it's retail where they would do like store and forward, for instance. That's not really something they do with JD Edwards anymore, but kind of that similar concept where you're storing it and then you're forwarding it, or you're storing it and then you're processing.
okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously every company is different, so it
Hmm.
depends on what they really need.
Yeah.
But it's good to know that we actually have planned for what a customer truly will need, other than just here's a vanilla version of it. This is what you have to get. So I like that it is very customizable in that way. But anyways, we can move on.
Mhm.
What are some other hidden or overlooked expenses that companies often fail to budget for when deploying AI?
So that's a great question. It's a critical one to ask. Companies are used to budgeting for compute and licensing for their software. And many will happily pay for a project to develop a solution and deploy it to production. But, when you're testing prior to that production rollout, you're going to need data for testing purposes. And an AI solution is only good as the data that it learns from. So you're going to see this in news stories every day. You already are, where big tech AI companies training on publicly accessible data because they need all that good, valid data. And rights holders aren't happy about this because they're the ones generating that value that the AI companies are then turning around and selling as a service to someone else. So to get back to your initial question, data prep and labeling would be very important, but potentially overlooked as part of the overall cost. You may need to cleanse and label your historical data, JD Edwards data, and this may involve manual effort or third-party tools or ETL services to, pull data from one system and put it into another, load it into a data warehouse, for example. Then you have integration and middleware costs. There can be overhead there as well. You may want to custom code OCI functions, utilize the OCI API gateway if we're using OCI for AI to facilitate, your data flow between Enterprise One Orchestrator and say an LLM that's running on a GPU backed compute instance, which is just a VM sitting out there in OCI. So, then you have to ask the question, well, how do you secure all of that? Do you build your own security solution from the ground up, or do you leverage what you already have or know, like Microsoft Intra or Oracle Identity and Access Management, or perhaps an open source solution? I mentioned always on compute instances a few times. That's another hidden cost. You can have, a lot of people who have access to OCI that can perhaps start and stop, an instance. Like a developer might have access, for piloting a project. And they might start something up, they might start a service, they might start up a compute instance, but when they're done, are they the one that's responsible at the end of the day to turn it off? And what if they forget? And then do you have logging and monitoring? Perhaps you need logs for data science purposes, and you could also have to retrain your models several times over, because the AI models are going to degrade over time, or they outlive their usefulness, due to changes in your business and changing business processes. And then finally, data security and compliance. You might have special requirements depending on the industry that you're in, or you could be complying with your governmental regulations like GDPR or HIPAA. So that's something to keep in mind. So to sum all this up, you're going to have various potential surprises. Things like extra invocation fees for services, accidental 24/7 billing because someone started up a service and forgot to stop it and you didn't have an automation in place that addressed that specific service, creeping monthly charges, and where it's slowly going up over time and no one's noticing it because it's not being monitored. And in some cases, increasing the scope of your solution might trigger add-on services, and that could even trigger audits for security and compliance.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, at the end of the day, it is very nice to actually hear somebody that knows about it talk about these hidden fees that you might see, or hidden is a strong word, I would say, in this instance, because it depends on what you really want to use it for. It is depending on the customer of what you really need and what level that you're trying to use some of these tools for. At the end of the day, though, it's good to hear somebody actually talk about a cost and baseline cost, because that is so scarce in this space of, oh, you want to know the cost of something? Oh, you have to jump on a call with a salesperson,
Mm-hmm.
and then you still don't get the cost. And then the next time that you're on the call with them, you still don't get the cost. And you could go through levels and levels and levels and never hear the true dollar point for this. Obviously, this is a overview, over level type deal where it's just, this is what the cost could be. So it is good to actually talk a little bit
Mm-hmm.
deeper into this. So I do appreciate that. But we can shift to our next segment, talking about pricing pitfalls and how to avoid them, really.
Okay.
So, what common mistakes do businesses make that lead to inflated or unexpected AI costs on OCI?
All right. So from my perspective, having watched this unfold in real time, I'd have to say not right sizing your compute resources or fully understanding how many instances of a service like the digital assistant that we mentioned earlier that you might need to service a project. So not taking the time to fully understand the cost of API usage, or for that matter, turning up a dedicated Gen AI cluster when you could perhaps use on-demand services instead, and then subsequently facing the realization that that on demand would have been better because the dedicated cluster has a 744-hour minimum, and it's an expensive resource that could cost you upwards of almost $18,000 for a dedicated Gen AI cluster in OCI, and that's just for one cluster with one unit in that cluster. So the cost goes up exponentially as you start adding units to that cluster, and did we really need that when there is an on-demand capability there? And that's why I was talking about earlier, that threshold of, hey, how much am I spending on these API calls, and would a dedicated cluster save me money here in this case, right? And in other cases, you might have a concern about security concerns, or is my data being exposed? Oracle, for example, will tell you, we're not looking at your data and we're not sharing your data with other customers out there in the public cloud, but that dedicated resource would give you a little more peace of mind in that regard. You're on hardware that no one else has access to, so that might be a reason to deploy something like that. But having said all that, another mistake that you want to avoid is assuming that an AI model that you're working with, or your project deployment, is set it and forget, or one and done, and that hey, you built it and you deployed it, now you don't need to maintain it over time. And in the real world, software is going to break, and that includes anything around AI. Well, this could be due to changes in the environment, changes in the business process, acquisitions. And for those reasons, you need to think about, long-term maintenance of any solution that you're going to deploy. And, you need to think about, do you want to manage that yourself, or you want to outsource the management to a specialty firm? I'd also recommend looking at excessive API usage. This could be due to inefficient processes or suboptimal coding on the front end. Are we doing too many round trips? When one or two would suffice, for instance. Start looking at log growth. You might need these logs for data science purposes, but do you need to store those in perpetuity? You could end up with a petabyte of data out there when you may only need a few terabytes, for instance, on a monthly basis. Do you have a purge plan in place? Post launch, do you need to do security retrofits? Who's going to be maintaining security, when the project's over? And many other things that I will probably think about after this podcast is over.
Yeah, and if our viewers out there, they want to learn a little bit more about the security side of things, we actually did a podcast with Brian Connor a few weeks ago, and we really did do a deep dive into AI security and what that looks like in the world of JD Edwards. So if you do have any deeper questions about how to keep things secure, what that really looks like, please go out there and watch that podcast, because it really does do a little bit of a deeper dive than what we're going to be doing today, obviously. And then when we're talking about the digital assistants, of course, like, businesses are going to grow. Like, it is insane to think that, oh, we're just going to stay at this one little level and we're never going to change and it's always going to work. Like, we don't need somebody to look over it. At the end of the day, a digital assistant, you might load up for one specific task, looking for that quick win, which is something that everybody is talking about these days. But that's only the beginning in a lot of these instances. So having someone there to maintain it in-house or outsourcing, depending on the situation in this case, it's honestly something that everybody should really look into, because again, you can start with, oh, this digital assistant's going to help us in this one specific way. And then that one specific way, you're like, wait, if we can do that there, we could basically use somewhat of the same level of what that digital assistant is on a different side of the business. And having someone there that could actually give you recommendations or could help you build the next step of, oh, let's kind of copy what we were doing here and let's move it to a different side of the business. It's just something that everybody should really at least implore, like, please look at it, because it is something that could help your business in so many different ways, that maybe you don't understand right now. But enough about that, I guess. How can companies accurately predict and manage ongoing operational expenses like OPEX related to AI usage on ACI or OCI?
Okay, so I'd say make use of OCI's native cost of visibility tools. They have a few built-in services to help monitor and forecast that I'm very familiar with. OCI cost analysis, budgets and alerts, and usage reports. So you need to consider tagging resources. There's a special cost tracking tag. There's regular tags and there's cost tracking tags. So you'll know if it's a cost tracking tag if that option is set. And then you can use that along with compartmentalizing your resources so you can have a better understanding or even a full understanding of where your budget is being spent. So as I mentioned earlier, looking to automate to control runtime, auto shut down idle resources using the OCI Resource Manager, or functions and events, or a cron job, or even a Windows schedule job if you're running it on your own VM in your own data center, or even on your laptop, if you're trying to save money there. I wouldn't do that full time, but it's definitely an option. You can investigate external FinOps solutions. So there's a few that are on the market out there, and I've even been investigating one of them for our own use. So you'll see patterns within the public cloud where they're starting to standardize on FinOps processes, because organizations are saying, hey, I've got public cloud resources in AWS and OCI and maybe Microsoft's Azure or Google, etc. And they all have different formatting for the billing and cost analysis. So rather than having to build your own data warehouse and reporting solution, to, have a better understanding of where all my spend is going. Although that's still an option, you still have the option to do that. There are third parties out there looking to collect all that data for you and put it into a standardized format. So,
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, not every company is going to want to run their own data center. I mean,
mhm.
if we're being honest with each other, that is a crazy cost to have for something like this. And when a third party, yes, make sure that they're secure, make sure that you trust this company with your data. Um, but when a third party will come in, they already have the infrastructure for it. So really, you're just paying that variable cost of how many hours will it really take and what type of work will you really need for this data. But at the end of the day, you're more than welcome to open your own data center out there.
Well, and when I was saying,
But
build your own solution, what I really was referring to there was around um, analyzing the data that you have for
mm,
billing in a public cloud environment. So, you could put you could put the data warehouse in the public cloud, and you could start loading all your consumption data into that, and then have cost reports generated on a daily basis. Have a dashboard out there so that people that are paying the bills have a better understanding of why are they paying this bill, where is this going, or is someone out there adding resources that we didn't plan for, that kind of
yeah, of course. And you also mentioned the expense tags.
thing.
Uh, Somebody that, like, yes, I utilize JD Edwards a lot, obviously in this job, but how does that really work in terms of, like, is it just like an alert that'll come out if you're going over budget in certain ways, or what does that actually look like in real
So
time?
yeah, they're cost tags. So like I said, there's basic tagging in OCI where you can say, this is a tag for this department, for instance. So all the resources, even if they're in different compartments within OCI, if they have a department tag on them, you'll know who's the owner of this, right?
Okay.
Who do I talk to when the bill is much higher this month than it was last month? That's what you want to know. But the cost tags are cost tracking tags that you can apply to resources as well, and that's simply for cost control purposes. So, and also for reporting against that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what specific practices can businesses implement to avoid costly overruns and surprise bills?
So again, tag everything. Have a policy in place to enforce the tagging. OCI is not going to make you, if you're working with OCI, they're not going to make you put tags on anything. But you might want to put reminders in your service desk software if it's needed to provide that prod or that gentle reminder to the person that's actually creating the resources to apply the tags. But you may also have an automation to deploy resources, and you can put your tags there as well. So that could be a scripted solution if it's not someone going out there and manually creating a resource. So apply consistent tags like environment is dev, test, or prod, or the owner is this team name, or the project is AI, for instance. Use tagged based budgets and cost reporting, so you can isolate and monitor your spending by workload or department. And the idea there is that you can't easily manage what you can't see. So an automation, again, I keep hitting this. It's so important. We implemented this at ERP Suites, and we've cut our monthly spend and reduced our projected spend for the next year by 50%. So that frees up budget for other projects. In the case of universal credits, if you have it's use it or lose it. So you can negotiate a discount with Oracle based on what you think you're going to spend over the next year. And if I think I'm going to spend $100,000 and I'm only spending 50, I've paid for that up front, so I have $50,000 potentially that I could apply for or use for other projects, right? It's just more legroom essentially on
Yeah,
your budget flight there. So
it's
like I said,
definitely great.
it'll free up budget for other projects potentially. And it can also help you just when you're negotiating your next annual renewal of those universal credits. Do I need 100,000 next year, or maybe we would be fine with 50 or 60, right? Or you could create a buffer. So say, hey, I've got this buffer room here. I've got some AI projects coming up. I don't know what they're going to cost. I have more room to work with. So definitely set budgets. That's something you can do within the OCI cloud platform. review and review the cost and usage reports. It's really important to do that. Try to do it weekly if possible. You're going to get your invoice for last month next month, but do you want to wait 2 months to realize that, hey, you've been spending more than you should have or more than you budgeted? So before you actually deploy those resources out to the cloud, use the cost estimator tool. It's going to give you a pretty good idea of what it's going to cost. Not always perfect, but very, very close. And then also consider your governance policies. Do you have a change control review board, for instance, for all these new services that you're spinning up? Like, who's approving this? Or, it's really just another set of eyes as well. Like, do we need this? Is this the right option that we want to deploy here? Is it matching the request even?
Yeah. And yeah, not to go back a little bit, but that 50% number that you said for ERP suites, the cutting the spend there, that is an insane metric to look at, because at the end of the day, like, if a company that, and it's hypothetical obviously, but if a company I was going to for one of these services, if they weren't utilizing it in the same way that I would be, I kind of question, like, oh, is this even useful? Because obviously you're not using it. Why would I use it? But 50% cutting costs at ERP suites for this is insane to really think about, because it really
It
does.
is,
It
but
frees up a
it
lot.
is right, but it also isn't, because if you think about it, like you're out there and you're addressing business needs on a day-to-day basis, and you're not really going out there and looking at big picture. It can, like I said, you can have creep, you can have over time where your costs go up and you don't really feel it because the bill is incrementally increasing by a small amount, and then over time you say, hey, look, year over year we're spending a lot more than we used to. What is all this excess cost allocated to? And a lot of it could be services you spun up 6 months ago and then you didn't need it and you just said, oh, or you moved on to the next thing and you forgot to turn it off, or services that are oversized, or you've got too many of one thing, or you're spending money on storing data that is no longer relevant to a project that you're working on, or hey, maybe this could be archived, that sort of thing. So that's, I wouldn't say every company's going to be up there and go out there and slash their budget by 50% or save 50%, but definitely it's more common than you might think. So, but if you have, if you follow along with everything that we're talking about, and if you have good governance, if you have a budget set, if you're reviewing your cost reports, you might not be in a situation to actually do that, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it's a great thing, really, and it's something that, I don't know. The way I always think about, especially this type of stuff, when it's coming to cutting costs in that way, I always think of the subscriptions that are out there these days, like all the different streaming channels and everything like that. There are certain apps out there in the world that you can manage all of your subscriptions. I never really believed in it until I downloaded it one day. I was intrigued to see how much I was really spending on subscriptions. It's an insane amount, by the way. I need to cut my costs, but
Yeah, I
it was
wish there
good
was a
to.
tool out there that would let me turn off the subscription when I wasn't using it, right? A
Yeah,
pay-as-you-go plan for Netflix instead of
wouldn't
having
that
to,
be
oh, I'm
great?
going to turn it on this month, and now no, I don't need it now because I'm not watching anything. I'll pay for it again in a few months, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That would be so nice if they would actually allow that. But
Mhm.
maybe this podcast right here will give them the idea and make it more manageable for us as just a
They're going
regular
to make their
consumer.
money
Yeah,
either way.
no, they'll be fine. I mean, I can't say that they're ever going to be in the green in terms of profits, but that's the streaming service. Maybe
I think
we're
they're
not
getting
gonna.
there. I think they're getting there. Yeah.
Yeah, we would hope so at this
Hmm.
point. They've been in business for many, many years and they
They're
still
figuring
haven't
it out.
turned over. Yeah, well, we'll
Maybe
figure.
we shouldn't spend $700 million on a movie that a million people are going to.
Yeah, no. But anyways, we can shift to our third segment, real world examples and budgeting strategies. So could you share examples of businesses that have successfully managed their AI integration costs effectively and how they did it?
Sure. So again, I mean, I'll repeat a little bit of what I said, but I can tell you how we've been managing our AI integration costs. So, like many companies or organizations, we didn't know what we needed to begin with, at least not initially. So, AI services and OCI were like a smorgasbord, right? So you had a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're just trying things to see how we like them, or this looks like what we need, so let's go ahead and deploy this and work with it for a bit until we determine if we want the canned solution, or the AI service, or do we want to build it ourselves. So we started by monitoring consumption, and that led to tagging resources, and that led to setting budgets on compartments, and that led to automation, which involves shutting down, and starting up things automatically on a schedule. And we don't need certain services running on the weekend, for instance. We don't need them running on federal holidays in certain cases. So we also started setting storage policies, and now we're looking at alerting and dashboards. So it's one, like I said, it's one thing to build a report and schedule it, and then pull that schedule report down and share it with someone via email. But it's another to have all that information readily available, so that the leaders and the stakeholders and also the people that are paying the bills have the information that they need at any time of day, so that they don't have to call me, right?
As much as you love being on calls,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
sure.
Everybody wants to feel needed, but sometimes self-service is a good thing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, having somebody in your actual infrastructure that is dedicated to that would, not only take away calls from you, but would also help you out in your internal business. But we've talked a lot about budgets today.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the question really is, what does a practical budgeting system look like? And what is a strategy a business could follow from initial AI consideration through ongoing operation? Could you walk us through an
Sure. I
example of
mean,
this?
from my perspective, a budget sometimes is an initial guess at how much we're going to spend, but also once you have a footprint out there, you can look at, hey, what are we spending, over month, and then set your budget based on that. And maybe you want to reduce costs a little bit, or maybe you want to keep it right where it's at. So you can set your budgets based on your actual spend. But I'm not sure how much time we have, but I'll go ahead and try to keep this to the key points. So you want to define your business use case first, and also use that OCI cost estimator tool. That's a free website that you can go to. And there's other cloud vendors that have a comparable version of that, or there's even RV tools. It's something that works with Excel. You can do any of that, but make sure you tag everything and create cost compartments. Automate cost controls from day one, and monitor and compare your estimated versus your actual monthly spend. So what did we forecast, and what's our actual spend? And then you can adjust your budget accordingly. So plan for ongoing operations such as retraining your models, tuning the solution, and then also support.
Exactly. It all comes back to, what are you planning on doing? What is the dream? What is your project map really look like, or roadmap, as what we call it? And I'm sure many others do. Um, so, anyways, I know that we're getting a little bit tight on time, so we'll shift into the last question. How important are ongoing cost governance and monitoring practices in ensuring the true financial success of AI projects?
Okay, well, how important? I would say the short answer is it's mission critical. So AI costs are nonlinear, right? And they can be unpredictable. So uh, that could be anywhere from the user behavior. Sometimes there could just be playing with a chatbot, to see what they can get it to do. And that could go to input size, to your model complexity with your LLM. So the costs could easily double or triple overnight if you're not monitoring it. You're not going to catch that. But with proper governance and tagging of compartments and resources and setting budgets, you can answer questions like, who owns this? I used to hear that a lot when I was in Fortune 500 company. Who owns this software? And then why did the cost go up? Why are we using 10 times more API calls, this week than we were last week? What changed? What got deployed that we didn't expect this? And how can we avoid this next time? Can we tune a process to reduce the cost? Now that it's out there, now that it's doing this, now that costs have gone up 10 times, how do we tune this? And is it possible to tune this sort of thing? And if we can't, then who's going to pay for that cost increase, right? So, if you have idle resources, we've been talking about this a lot. Automation is really, really important. you want to stop or shut it down if you can. There's certain services though that if you stop them, I'm thinking of one particular service. There's an Oracle Analytics Cloud that even if you stop it, you still pay a portion of that hourly spend for that. So the only way to get rid of the the spend is to delete the resource, and that's kind of unfortunate. But in other cases, and that may be something to do with software licensing, I would guess. But in the case of like a Windows compute resource, you're going to pay for a Windows license for every hour that machine is up and running. But when you stop the resource, when you stop that server, you're only going to pay for the storage that's associated with it. So the boot drive and any data drives that you have attached to it, that's all you're going to pay for when they're turned off. And then the autonomous data warehouse that's got a facility, I think I mentioned this earlier, out there that you can say, hey, I only want to run this from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. or whatever schedule you want to set, and you can go in and set that there. And then if you can't, then automate that through shell scripts or through events and functions in OCI or Lambda in AWS. So in other cases, just turning it off, it will work for you. So know the difference before you deploy. Like I said earlier, do I need a dedicated resource or can I just use on demand? Am I going to be able to get by with the free or the first 5,000 free API calls, that sort of thing, or do I need to allocate budget for a dedicated resource? So the bottom line to all that is going to be ongoing cost governance and how you build your scalable solution. So without the governance, you're going to experience surprise billing events no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. You got to make sure that you're on top of this type of stuff because cost can really, and again, it's not like if you don't pay attention to it every second of every day, that's just going to fall out of your hands. Like you're just going to lose control. But it is something that you should be mindful of at every moment that you can possibly be thinking about costs. Now that our listeners have an idea of how much AI will cost, connect with Charles Anderson and the ERP Suites team at erpsuites.com to get a more personalized solution and price for your Oracle Cloud AI initiatives. But that's a wrap for today's episode. That's cost focused. Special shout out to you, Charles. Seriously, I know you're a busy man, but it's really great to have you on here shedding light on the real costs of AI integration. If you found today's insights valuable, please subscribe, leave us a review, like it, and share this episode with your company, with a coworker, maybe with a friend that is struggling with AI costs. Until next time, keep budgeting smart, avoid hidden costs, and drive maximum value with your technology investments. Catch you later.